From fame to exile, Paul Hogan's comeback king. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from never falling, but from finding the strength to rise again after everything has been lost. This is the extraordinary story of Paul Hogan's journey from the pinnacle of global stardom through devastating scandal and exile to an unlikely redemption that proves the human spirit's capacity for resilience, forgiveness, and second chances. What does it take to rebuild a life when everything you've worked for has been stripped away? How do you find hope when your name has become synonymous with controversy rather than joy? And what kind of courage is required to face the world again when that world has already passed judgment against you? This is not just another celebrity comeback story. This is a masterclass in human resilience, a testament to the power of authenticity over artifice, and proof that it's never too late to write a new chapter in your own story. From the depths of legal nightmare and personal exile to small but meaningful steps toward redemption, Paul Hogan's journey back represents something profound about the possibility of transformation, forgiveness, and the courage to begin again when all seems lost. Chapter 1: The Darkest Hour. By 2010, Paul Hogan had lost everything that had once defined him. The tax settlement that ended 8 years of legal warfare had brought not vindication but merely the cessation of active persecution. His marriage to Linda Kozlowski was crumbling under the weight of years of stress and scrutiny. His reputation lay in ruins, his relationship with Australia had been poisoned by scandal, and his once vibrant career had been reduced to silence. Paul leads a pretty calm existence now. He's single, observed those who witnessed his life during this difficult transition period. The description was deliberately understated, masking the profound isolation and uncertainty that characterized Paul's daily existence. The man who had once thrived on attention and public engagement was now living in careful anonymity, uncertain about his future and haunted by the past. The aftermath of the tax settlement provided no real relief from the problems that had consumed his life. While the legal pressure had ended, the reputational damage remained severe and seemingly permanent. I was never charged with tax evasion for lack of evidence, but I've still got it attached to me, Paul reflected with obvious frustration about the lasting impact of accusations that had never been proven in court. The media coverage that had destroyed his reputation during the investigation continued to shape public perception long after the settlement. Every mention of his name was still accompanied by references to the tax scandal, ensuring that his legacy would be permanently tainted by allegations that had been resolved but never disproven to public satisfaction. The divorce from Linda in 2014 represented the final collapse of the personal life that had sustained Paul through his greatest triumphs and most difficult challenges. After more than 2 decades together, the relationship that had begun with authentic romance and mutual respect ended in the sterile language of legal documentation citing irreconcilable differences. Although he was never one to express his feelings openly, those close to him revealed that Paul was genuinely heartbroken when the marriage ended, observed those who understood the depth of his personal loss. The man who had built his career on natural charm and emotional authenticity found himself emotionally devastated but unable or unwilling to express that devastation publicly. The custody arrangements for their son Chance provided Paul with purpose and responsibility but also highlighted how dramatically his circumstances had changed. "I got custody, which I wanted," Paul noted, but the practicalities of single parenthood in his 70s, while dealing with ongoing health issues and financial constraints, presented challenges he had never anticipated. His health problems, particularly the muscle atrophy that was gradually weakening his body, made the emotional stress of his situation even more difficult to bear. Paul has been battling health issues including muscle loss and chronic pain, which have made his daily life increasingly challenging, described those who observed his physical decline during this period. The isolation was profound and multifaceted. Professionally, Paul found himself essentially unemployable in the major entertainment markets that had once competed for his participation. Personally, many relationships had been strained or destroyed by years of scandal and controversy. Geographically, he was living in exile from the country that had once celebrated him as its greatest cultural export. In recent public appearances, Paul appears thin and somewhat frail but continues to maintain the optimistic and humorous spirit that once made him a beloved figure. noted those who encountered him during rare public occasions. But behind the facade of continued good humor lay a man struggling to find meaning and purpose in a life that had been fundamentally altered by circumstances largely beyond his control. The financial constraints imposed by years of legal expenses and reduced earning capacity meant that Paul was living far more modestly than during his peak success years. The man who had once been among Australia's wealthiest entertainers was now carefully managing resources and making choices based on economic necessity rather than creative preference. Perhaps most difficult was the psychological adaptation to his changed status in the entertainment industry and popular culture. The spontaneous affection and respect that had characterized public reaction to Paul throughout his career had been replaced by suspicion, criticism, and in some cases, outright hostility from people who believed the worst about accusations that had never been proven. The daily reality of this transformation was crushing for someone who had spent decades being recognized and appreciated wherever he went. The simple pleasure of public interaction, which had been a source of energy and joy throughout his career, had become a source of anxiety and discomfort that he often chose to avoid entirely. But even in this darkest hour, there remained within Paul Hogan a core of resilience and authenticity that had sustained him through every previous challenge of his life. The same qualities that had enabled his transformation from bridge worker to global icon, determination, humor, and an instinctive understanding of human nature, would eventually provide the foundation for the most remarkable comeback in entertainment history. Chapter 2: Learning to Live Again. The process of rebuilding a life from the ashes of scandal and exile is rarely dramatic or cinematic. For Paul Hogan, it began with small, almost invisible steps toward reclaiming some sense of normalcy and purpose in a world that had fundamentally changed during the years of legal warfare and media persecution. Paul leads a pretty calm existence now, became a refrain used to describe his post-settlement life, but this calm was not peace. It was the careful quietude of someone learning to navigate a world where his very presence could trigger unwanted attention and renewed controversy. The challenge was finding ways to live authentically while avoiding the spotlight that had once been the source of his greatest joy and most devastating pain. The relationship with his son Chance became central to Paul's efforts to rebuild meaning in his life. "I got custody, which I want." Paul's son Chance, "He's great, he's very funny, sense of humor, he's a great kid," Paul noted with obvious pride and affection. The responsibility of single parenthood provided structure and purpose while also connecting Paul to values and relationships that transcended the entertainment industry chaos that had dominated his recent years. He said he's a stayer, he's a bit quiet. If he knows his pepper art's around, he'll go and do something deliberately and then see himself. He's inherited that stare streak. Paul observed about his son's personality, revealing both his own continued ability to find humor in daily life and his deep connection to family relationships that provided stability amid the daily routines of parenting, school meetings, homework supervision, weekend activities, gave Paul's life a rhythm and meaning that had nothing to do with his celebrity status or entertainment career. "I've been the youngest at the PTA meetings and I've been the oldest one." Paul joked about his unusual position as an aging celebrity single father navigating the ordinary challenges of child rearing. The geographical split between his life in America and his continuing connections to Australia created both practical challenges and emotional complexity. "I'm mostly living in America, I want to be over there. Mindfulness on 2 weeks can handle it. Self are to come. Here's a girl for you to come with me." Paul explained about the difficulty of maintaining relationships across continents while managing the constraints of his legal and financial situation. Health management became an increasingly important part of Paul's daily routine as the muscle atrophy and other physical problems that had begun during his most stressful years continued to worsen. The man who had once been known for his physical vitality and natural energy had to adapt to significant limitations in mobility and strength while maintaining his role as an active parent and public figure. In recent public appearances, Paul appears thin and somewhat frail but continues to maintain the optimistic and humorous spirit that once made him a beloved figure, noted those who observed his adaptation to these physical challenges. The determination to maintain his essential personality despite changed circumstances demonstrated the resilience that would prove crucial to his eventual comeback. Financial constraints that would have seemed unimaginable during his peak success years forced Paul to approach opportunities with a pragmatic rather than purely creative perspective. Projects that might once have been automatic rejections became worthy of serious consideration based on practical necessity rather than artistic fulfillment or career advance. The emotional work of processing the trauma of the investigation, the media persecution, and the personal losses required Paul to develop new sources of strength and perspective. Yeah, it did make me angry. I might want to thump somebody, so I haven't really got it out of my system yet. Paul admitted about the lasting psychological impact of what he had endured, but gradually Paul began to rediscover aspects of his authentic self that had been buried under years of defensive reactions and survival mode thinking. The humor, intelligence, and natural charm that had made him beloved were still intact beneath the layers of bitterness and caution that trauma had created. Small professional opportunities began to emerge from unexpected directions, often from people who had admired Paul's work for years and were willing to take risks that major studios and production companies avoided. Directors like Dean Murphy, who had grown up watching Paul's television shows, offered projects that acknowledged his changed circumstances while providing creative outlets. About 16 or 17 years ago, we're doing a film called Strange Bedfellows, and we're struggling to cast one of the lead roles, and our American distributor on the film said, "What about Paul Hogan?" And I said, "I'll just never get him," Murphy recalled about his initial hesitation to approach someone he considered far above his production level. He sent me a script or an outline of Strange Bedfellows, and it was really funny, and I met him, and he was such a low-key, gallant sort of guy, and I thought, yeah, I could work with this guy, it'll be no problem, Murphy continued, describing the beginning of a creative relationship that would prove important to Paul's gradual return to meaningful work. These smaller projects represented more than just employment opportunities. They were chances for Paul to reconnect with the aspects of performance and storytelling that had originally drawn him to entertainment. Working with people who respected his talent and understood his situation allowed him to begin rebuilding confidence in his abilities and value as a performer. Chapter 3: The Courage to Return. The decision to actively pursue professional opportunities in Australia represented a profound act of courage for someone whose relationship with his homeland had been so thoroughly poisoned by years of scandal and controversy. Paul's return to Australian film productions was not just a career choice, it was an emotional and psychological risk that could have resulted in renewed humiliation and rejection. I think the great thing about the movies that he made with Dean Murphy was that Paul Hogan had then gotten a little bit older, and he played roles that were age-appropriate, and he also played Australian men, and he was back in Australia, and that's why those movies worked. Observe those who understood the significance of Paul's willingness to work in Australia again. The collaboration with Dean Murphy on films like Strange Bedfellows and Charlie and Boots represented a new phase in Paul's career that acknowledged both his changed circumstances and his enduring appeal. These were not attempts to recapture the global phenomenon of Crocodile Dundee, but rather efforts to create entertainment that reflected Paul's current reality while honoring the qualities that had made him beloved. "Do you remember when I was little, Dad promised me that one day we could go to the northernmost tip of Australia? Well, we're doing it," Paul said about Charlie and Boots, a film that combined road movie adventure with genuine father-son emotion. The project allowed Paul to explore themes of family, aging, and reconciliation that reflected his own life experience. Working with Shane Jacobson, another Australian entertainer who understood the pressures and opportunities of representing Australian culture to audiences, Paul found collaborative relationships that supported rather than exploited his return to prominence. Shane Jacobson, who I'd met before, another lovely bloke, and I thought, yeah, I could go and shoot, maybe it'll be fun. Paul reflected on the enjoyment he found in these collaborations. The films were modest productions by international standard, but they provided Paul with something more valuable than large budgets or major studio backing. They gave him the opportunity to work with people who respected his talent and wanted to create entertainment rather than simply capitalize on his notoriety. It had mastered his sense of timing and comedy. "He's the thing that people are drawn to, and that's what works on screen," noted those who worked with Paul during this period, recognizing that his essential appeal remained intact despite the difficulties he had endured. The public and critical reception of these films was cautiously positive, with audiences and reviewers recognizing both Paul's continued charisma and his willingness to play characters that reflected his age and experience rather than attempting to recreate his younger persona. This marked a significant step in the public's gradual acceptance of Paul's return to entertainment. "I'm not a very good actor. I'm sort of like a bit of a one-trick pony. I can deal with minor variations, but you're never gonna see me in King Lear or something." Paul's self-deprecating assessment of his abilities reflected both humility and realistic self-awareness about his strengths and limitations as a performer. But this apparent limitation was actually a form of strength that distinguished Paul from many other entertainers. His willingness to remain within his authentic range rather than attempting transformations that might seem forced or artificial allowed him to create performances that felt genuine and emotionally honest. The experience of working in Australia again also provided Paul with opportunities to reconnect with the culture and landscape that had originally inspired his most successful creation. Being back in familiar environments with people who understood his background and values helped restore some of the creative confidence that had been damaged by years of exile and controversy. He's always missed home, and he's always spent a lot more time here than people realize. He's back and forth all the time, but he doesn't call the press conference when he comes back to spend time with his family, noted those who observed Paul's gradual reintegration into Australian life and culture. The decision to maintain a lower public profile while working in Australia demonstrated Paul's hard-earned wisdom about managing his relationship with media and public attention. Rather than seeking the spotlight that had once been natural to him, he focused on the work itself and the relationships that made that work meaningful. These professional experiences also provided Paul with evidence that the Australian entertainment community was willing to separate his artistic contributions from the controversies that had dominated headlines. Directors, actors, and crew members who worked with him during this period consistently reported positive experiences that emphasized his professionalism, humor, and collaborative spirit. The success of these smaller projects, while modest by the standards Paul had previously achieved, represented something more significant than box office performance. They proved that comeback was possible, that public forgiveness could be earned, and that authentic talent could eventually transcend even the most devastating scandal. Perhaps most importantly, the experience of returning to Australian productions allowed Paul to rediscover aspects of his identity and creativity that had been suppressed during the years of defensive survival. Working in familiar cultural contexts with people who understood and appreciated his background helped restore the natural confidence that had been his greatest asset throughout his career. Chapter 4: Finding New Purpose. As Paul Hogan gradually rebuilt his professional life through modest but meaningful projects, he began to discover that the most profound changes in his situation were not external but internal. The man who had once defined success through global fame and massive financial rewards was learning to find satisfaction and purpose in much simpler but ultimately more sustainable forms of achievement and connection. The relationship with his son, Chance, became not just a parental responsibility but a source of renewed understanding about what truly mattered in life. "I still see him because we've got a son between us. I got custody, which I wanted," Paul noted, but the significance of this relationship extended far beyond legal arrangements or practical considerations. "He's great, he's very funny, sense of humor, he's a great kid. He said he's a stayer, he's a bit quiet if he knows his pepper arts, or he'll go and do something deliberately and then see himself. He's inherited that stare streak." Paul's description of his son revealed both pride in the young man's character and recognition of inherited traits that connected them across generational boundaries. The daily experience of parenting provided Paul with perspectives on success, failure, and personal worth that were completely independent of entertainment industry standards or public opinion. The simple pleasure of watching his son develop his own personality and capabilities offered rewards that were immune to external criticism or controversy. The geographic mobility between America and Australia, initially a source of stress and complication, gradually became a form of freedom that allowed Paul to maintain connections to both cultures while avoiding complete identification with either. "I'm mostly living in America. I want to be over there. 2 weeks can handle it," Paul explained about his ability to navigate between different environments based on practical and emotional need. This flexibility also provided Paul with perspective on the different ways that his scandal and comeback were perceived in various cultural contexts. American audiences less familiar with the details of his tax case were more willing to focus on his entertainment contribution. Australian audiences, while more knowledgeable about the controversy, also had deeper appreciation for his cultural significance. The health challenges that had seemed so threatening during the worst periods of stress gradually became manageable conditions rather than overwhelming obstacles. Paul's adaptation to his physical limitations demonstrated the same practical problem-solving approach that had characterized his entire career, finding ways to work within constraints rather than being defeated by them. Paul has been battling health issues including muscle loss and chronic pain, which have made his daily life increasingly challenging. In recent public appearances, Paul appears thin and somewhat frail, but continues to maintain the optimistic and humorous spirit that once made him a beloved figure, noted those who observed his adaptation to these circumstances. The financial constraints that had initially seemed so limiting gradually became opportunities to rediscover the authentic motivations that had originally driven Paul's creative work. Without the pressure to maintain the lifestyle and status symbols of peak success, he could focus on projects that interested him personally rather than those that offered maximum financial reward. Professional relationships that developed during this period were often deeper and more satisfying than many of the associations from his peak success years. Working with directors and collaborators who chose to work with him despite rather than because of his controversial status created bonds based on mutual respect and shared creative goals rather than commercial calculation. I, like everyone else, used to watch the Paul Hogan show. I think I was like 7 or something when it started and was always just a huge fan of his characters because I was interested in filmmaking at an early age. Someone gave me a book on Paul Hogan that sat next to my bed growing up, recalled Dean Murphy about his long-standing admiration for Paul's work. This kind of genuine appreciation from younger entertainment professionals provided Paul with evidence that his creative contributions had lasting value that transcended temporary controversies. Working with people who had been inspired by his earlier work reminded him of the positive impact he had achieved during his career. The gradual rebuilding of professional relationships also led to opportunities for Paul to mentor and support other performers and creators who were facing their own challenges in the entertainment industry. His experience with Scandal, Comeback, and resilience gave him unique insights that could be valuable to others navigating similar difficulties. The public's gradual acceptance of Paul's return was evidenced not through dramatic gestures of forgiveness, but through the quiet resumption of normal professional and social interaction. People began to judge him based on current behavior and contributions rather than dwelling exclusively on past controversy. Perhaps most significantly, Paul began to rediscover the simple pleasure of entertaining people without the enormous pressure and expectations that had characterized his peak success period. The joy of making audiences laugh, which had originally motivated his transition from bridge worker to performer, remained intact beneath the layers of trauma and defensive reaction. The process of reconnecting with this fundamental motivation provided Paul with a renewed sense of purpose that was independent of external validation or commercial success. The satisfaction of creating authentic entertainment that reflected his genuine personality and values proved more durable than the artificial highs of massive commercial success. Chapter 5: The Tourism Campaign Miracle. In 2018, something unexpected happened that would provide Paul Hogan with his most visible and symbolic return to public prominence. Tourism Australia approached him about participating in a promotional campaign that would capitalize on the enduring global recognition of the Crocodile Dundee character while introducing him to new generations of potential visitors to Australia. 2 weeks ago, this clip was released onto the internet looking suspiciously like a movie trailer. Danny Dundee. Tourism Australia had basically gone to different advertising agencies in America and said, "We need to remind Americans about Australia as a tourism destination," explained those involved in the campaign's development. The concept was brilliantly simple and psychologically sophisticated. Rather than ignoring or apologizing for Paul's controversial period, the campaign would leverage the nostalgia and affection that many people still felt for the Crocodile Dundee character while positioning Paul as a mature, self-aware entertainer who could acknowledge both his achievements and his limitations. Actually, I did the survey and did 10 countries and asked, what they knew about Australia. It was famous Australian and it was Mick Dundee. Oh, not me, I didn't get a Guernsey. It was #1 in 9 out of 10. Paul noted with characteristic self-deprecating humor about the research that had led to his involvement in the campaign. The campaign's genius lay in its recognition that Crocodile Dundee had achieved a level of cultural immortality that transcended Paul Hogan's personal circumstances. The character had become part of global popular culture in ways that made him valuable to Tourism Australia regardless of the controversies that had surrounded his creator. But then all the Australian stars, actors all jumped on board and all wanted to be a part of it. I was pretending there wasn't going to be another Dundee movie. Paul explained about how the campaign evolved to include other Australian entertainers who wanted to associate themselves with the project and its positive celebration of Australian culture. The public response to the campaign was overwhelmingly positive, demonstrating that international audiences were ready to embrace Paul's return to prominence and that the affection for Mick Dundee remained strong enough to overcome concerns about past controversies. The campaign became a viral sensation that generated millions of views and extensive media coverage. "You the best Crocodile Dundee since Crocodile Dundee, really?" Yes. People started going, "Yes, actually we do want Paul to come back into another Crocodile Dundee movie." Which was not the point of the ad, but that became the take-home message of it. Noted those who observed the public reaction to the campaign. The success of the tourism campaign provided with something that years of legal settlements and small film roles had been unable to achieve. Evidence that public opinion about him was capable of change and that his cultural contributions were still valued and appreciated by international audiences. No one was more amused by it than Paul. And talking about it, he'd go, "The character is like 35 years old," and I'm like, Paul's reaction to renewed calls for another Crocodile Dundee film demonstrated both his realistic assessment of his capabilities and his appreciation for the affection that audiences continued to feel for his most famous creation. The campaign also provided Paul with an opportunity to work with Tourism Australia in ways that aligned with his original role as an unofficial cultural ambassador for his country. After years of feeling exiled and rejected by Australian institutions, he was once again being asked to represent Australia positively to the world. The collaborative aspects of the campaign, working with other Australian entertainers and Tourism Australia officials, reminded Paul of the best aspects of his entertainment career. The pleasure of collective creativity in service of goals that extended beyond personal advancement or financial gain. The international media coverage of the campaign was overwhelmingly positive, focusing on Paul's enduring appeal and the clever creativity of the promotional concept, rather than revisiting the scandals and controversies that had dominated coverage of him for years. Perhaps most importantly, the campaign's success demonstrated that Paul's instinctive understanding of what audiences wanted remained intact despite everything he had endured. His ability to connect with people through authentic humor and genuine warmth had survived the trauma of scandal and exile. The campaign provided Paul with renewed confidence in his ability to contribute meaningfully to Australian culture and the entertainment industry. For the first time in years, he was being celebrated rather than criticized for his association with the Crocodile Dundee character and his role in promoting Australia to the world. The experience also reminded Paul of the fundamental truth that had driven his entire career: the simple pleasure of making people happy through entertainment. The tourism campaign succeeded because it captured and amplified the qualities that had made him beloved in the first place: authenticity, humor, and genuine affection for Australia. The viral success of the campaign created new opportunities and renewed interest in Paul's work from industry professionals who had previously avoided association with him due to controversy. The demonstration of his continued popular appeal made him a more attractive prospect for future projects and collaboration. Chapter 6: Wisdom Through Adversity. The later years of Paul Hogan's career were marked not by the explosive success of his peak period or the devastating controversies of his scandal year, but by a more mature and sustainable form of achievement, based on wisdom earned through adversity and a deeper understanding of what truly matters in life and career. "I'm not a very good actor. I'm sort of like a bit of a one-trick pony. I can deal with minor variations, but you're never gonna see me in King Lear or something." Paul's assessment of his own abilities reflected a level of self-awareness and acceptance that had been gained through experience and reflection. This honest evaluation of his strengths and limitations became a source of strength rather than constraint, allowing Paul to focus on projects and opportunities that utilized his authentic capabilities rather than forcing him to attempt transformations that might seem forced or artificial. The relationship with his son Chance continued to provide both purpose and perspective as Paul navigated the challenges of aging, while maintaining his role as an active parent and positive influence. "I still see him because we've got a son between us. I got custody, which I want." Paul's son Chance, he's great. He's very funny. Sense of humor. He's a great kid. Paul noted with obvious satisfaction. The geographic flexibility between America and Australia evolved into a lifestyle that maximized the benefits of both environments while minimizing the drawbacks of complete identification with either. "I'm mostly living in America, I want to be over there. 2 weeks can handle it. Here's a girl for you to come with me. Paul explained about his ability to navigate between different cultural contexts. Health management remained an ongoing challenge, but Paul's adaptation to his physical limitations demonstrated the vain, practical problem-solving approach that had characterized his entire career. Rather than being defeated by constraints, he found ways to work within them while maintaining his essential capabilities and personality. Paul has been battling health issues, including muscle loss and chronic pain, which have made his daily life increasingly challenging. In recent public appearances, Paul appears thin and somewhat frail, but continues to maintain the optimistic and humorous spirit that once made him a beloved figure. Noted those who observed his graceful adaptation to the aging process. The financial constraints that had seemed so threatening during the immediate aftermath of his scandal gradually became opportunities for Paul to rediscover the authentic motivations that had originally driven his creative work. Without pressure to maintain peak success lifestyle standards, he could focus on personally meaningful projects rather than purely commercial consideration. Professional relationships developed during this period were often characterized by greater depth and mutual respect than many associations from his peak success year. Working with directors, actors, and collaborators who chose to work with him despite rather than because of his controversial status created bonds based on shared creative goals and genuine appreciation. Dean Murphy said, "Look, we've got a film where we'd like you to be in it with Paul Hogan as your father. Would you be interested in doing it?" Recalled those involved in projects that brought together multiple generations of Australian entertainers in collaborative rather than competitive relationships. The public's gradual acceptance of Paul's return was demonstrated through the resumption of normal professional and social interactions rather than dramatic gestures of forgiveness or rehabilitation. People began evaluating him based on current contributions and behavior rather than dwelling exclusively on past controversies. The tourism campaign success had provided Paul with evidence that his cultural contributions retained lasting value and that public opinion about him was capable of positive change. This gave him confidence to pursue other opportunities for public engagement and creative expression. Perhaps most significantly, Paul rediscovered the fundamental pleasure of entertaining people without the enormous pressure and expectations that had characterized his peak success period. The joy of making audiences laugh and connecting with people through authentic humor remained the most durable and satisfying aspect of his career. I think eventually he will come back to Australia for sure. I think this is home. It's always been home for him. Observe those who understood Paul's continuing connection to Australian culture and landscape despite the complications created by his scandal and exile year. The wisdom gained through adversity included a deeper appreciation for the relationships and experiences that provide lasting satisfaction independent of external validation or commercial success. Paul's understanding of what truly mattered had been refined through the crucible of public humiliation, financial struggle, and personal loss. The process of rebuilding his life and career had taught Paul valuable lessons about resilience, authenticity, and the importance of staying connected to core values even when external circumstances are chaotic or hostile. These lessons informed not just his professional choices but his approach to parenting, relationships, and personal growth. The later years of Paul's career represented a form of success that was more sustainable and personally meaningful than the peak achievements that had made him famous. The satisfaction of authentic work, genuine relationships, and positive contribution to others' lives proved more durable than the artificial highs of massive commercial success. Chapter 7. The Legacy of Resilience. As Paul Hogan entered his eighth, the contours of his legacy began to emerge not just as the creator of beloved entertainment, but as an example of human resilience, authenticity, and the possibility of redemption even after the most devastating public and personal failure. Although no longer actively involved in the entertainment industry, Paul Hogan expressed a desire to complete one final project to thank his fans before officially retiring, reflected his continuing sense of connection to audiences who had supported him through both triumph and adversity. The man who had once defined success through global fame and massive financial returns had discovered forms of achievement and satisfaction that were independent of external validation or commercial metrics. The relationships, experiences, and personal growth that had emerged from his years of struggle provided rewards that were immune to the fluctuations of public opinion or industry fashion. The relationship with his son Chance remained central to Paul's sense of purpose and meaning, providing daily reminders of what truly matters in life while connecting him to hopes and possibilities that extended beyond his own career or reputation. He's great, he's very funny, sense of humor, he's a great kid. He's inherited that stare streak, Paul noted with obvious pride and affection. The gradual restoration of his relationship with Australia, evidenced through successful projects and positive public reception, represented a form of homecoming that transcended legal resolutions or media rehabilitation. The country that had once threatened to prosecute him was gradually remembering why it had originally celebrated him as a cultural hero. The international recognition that Paul continued to receive, particularly evident in the tourism campaign's viral success, demonstrated that his contributions to global popular culture retained lasting value independent of temporary controversies or local political consideration. Actually, I did the survey and did 10 countries and asked what they knew about Australia. It was famous Australian and it was Mick Dundee. Paul's observation about his enduring international recognition reflected both humility and satisfaction at the lasting impact of his most significant creative achievement. The wisdom gained through adversity had transformed Paul from someone who succeeded through natural talent and instinct into someone who understood success and failure as temporary conditions that test but don't define character. This perspective provided him with a form of security that was independent of external circumstances. The younger entertainers and industry professionals who sought to work with Paul during his comeback years were often motivated by genuine admiration for his talent and respect for his resilience rather than commercial calculation. These relationships provided evidence that his influence on Australian and international entertainment extended beyond his most famous creations. I, like everyone else, used to watch the Paul Hogan show. I think I was like 7 or something when it started and was always just a huge fan. Recalled directors and collaborators who had been inspired by Paul's work and wanted to support his return to meaningful creative activity. The public's gradual acceptance of Paul's return represented more than just celebrity rehabilitation. It demonstrated the human capacity for forgiveness, second chances, and the recognition that people are more than their worst moments or greatest mistake. The health challenges that Paul continued to face were managed with characteristic humor and practical adaptation, demonstrating the same qualities that had enabled his original success and eventual comeback. In recent public appearances, Paul appears thin and somewhat frail but continues to maintain the optimistic and humorous spirit that once made him a beloved figure. Perhaps most importantly, Paul's journey from scandal to redemption provided inspiration for others facing their own struggles with public humiliation, personal failure, or seemingly insurmountable challenges. His example proved that recovery was possible, that authentic character could eventually triumph over temporary circumstances, and that it was never too late to write a new chapter in your own story. The entertainment industry learned valuable lessons from Paul's experience about the importance of supporting artists through difficult periods rather than abandoning them at the first sign of controversy. The loyalty shown by directors like Dean Murphy and the successful outcomes of their collaborations demonstrated the value of creative relationships based on mutual respect and shared artistic goals. The broader cultural significance of Paul's comeback extended beyond entertainment into questions of justice, forgiveness, and the treatment of public figures who face accusations or controversy. His experience highlighted the importance of distinguishing between legal resolution and social rehabilitation, between accusations and proof, between temporary circumstances and permanent character. As Paul's active career wound down, the legacy he left was not just the beloved characters and entertaining films that had made him famous, but the example of how to survive devastating setbacks with dignity, authenticity, and hope. Epilogue: The Comeback King's final chapter. Today, Paul Hogan stands as one of entertainment history's most remarkable examples of resilience, redemption, and the power of authentic character to overcome even the most devastating circumstance. His journey from the pinnacle of global stardom through scandal, exile, and personal devastation to a hard-earned but meaningful comeback represents something profound about the human capacity for growth, forgiveness, and second chances. While time and health may no longer be on his side, Paul Hogan remains a vivid symbol of a golden era, but more than that, he has become a symbol of hope for anyone who has faced overwhelming adversity and wondered if recovery was possible. The man who made the world laugh with Crocodile Dundee, spent his later years learning to find joy in smaller but more sustainable forms of success. The respect of colleagues, the love of family, the satisfaction of authentic work, and the knowledge that his contributions to popular culture would outlive any temporary controversy. I hope you enjoyed the little journey with me, Paul said in a recent interview, a phrase that captures both his humility and his continued ability to connect with people through genuine human warmth. The journey he took audiences on wasn't just through entertainment, but through an example of how to face life's greatest challenges with humor, honesty, and hope. The lessons of Paul Hogan's comeback extend far beyond the entertainment industry. His story proves that reputation can be rebuilt, that public opinion can change, that authentic character eventually triumphs over temporary circumstances, and that the qualities that create lasting success, humor, authenticity, resilience, and genuine care for others, are the same qualities that enable recovery from devastating failure. For anyone facing their own dark night of the soul, Paul Hogan's journey offers proof that comeback is possible, that redemption can be earned, and that the human spirit is capable of remarkable resilience when supported by authentic character and genuine hope. The bridge worker who became a global icon, who fell from grace into scandal and exile, who rebuilt his life one day at a time through determination and authenticity, has completed a circle that brings him back to the values that made his original success meaningful. The simple pleasure of making people happy, the importance of staying true to yourself regardless of external pressure, and the knowledge that how you respond to adversity reveals more about your character than how you handle success. Paul Hogan's story is ultimately about the triumph of authentic human character over artificial circumstances, the power of persistence over temporary setback, and the possibility that anyone at any age, under any circumstances, can write a new chapter in their own story if they have the courage to begin again. The Comeback King's final chapter is not about returning to past glories, but about finding meaning, purpose, and satisfaction in the present moment while carrying forward the wisdom earned through experience. It's a story that continues to inspire because it proves that the best stories are not about avoiding failure, but about finding the strength to rise again when failure seems complete. In the end, Paul Hogan's greatest performance was not Mick Dundee or any of his television characters. It was learning to be authentically himself through every phase of life, from bridge worker to global icon to scandalous exile to comeback king. That performance continues today, and it remains as inspiring and compelling as any story ever told about the resilience of the human spirit and the possibility of redemption for anyone brave enough to pursue it.